about to start, and I want to welcome you all. I want to notice the presence of three ambassadors, and I want to thank the two key speakers in this conference. We have Professor Sedomir Nestorovic. He holds a PhD from Sciences Po in Paris. He has been teaching geopolitics and international marketing at the ESSEC Business School in Singapore for the last 15 years. As you know, ESSEC's Business School is one of the most famous business school in the world, and their Masters in Management last year was rated as the third one by the Financial Times. So Professor Nestorovic has written several books on geopolitics, but also on marketing. And then here on my right, I have Professor Luís Tomé. He holds a PhD from the University of Coimbra. He is a full professor at Universidade Autónoma, and he is their director of the Department of International Relations. And he also is the head of the research unit of his department, which is called Observare. It's the Observatory on Foreign Relations, and he is also a researcher at IPRI Nova. So Professor Tomé has written extensively on foreign relations. He is also the author of several books on international affairs. What we are going to listen to in the afternoon, this afternoon now, is a conference on corporate geopolitics and why this matter, and also probably questioning why this subject should matter and should be relevant also for people that deal mainly with foreign affairs and foreign relations. You do know that the Russian invasion of Ukraine was a kind of wake-up call. In 3 months after the Russian invasion, more than 1,000 companies left Russia, and they did leave Russia on their own. I mean, it wasn't yet the time of outside political pressure. And this event was something new. We had some other parallel event 20 years ago when the apartheid was fighting with the rest of the world, the maintenance of the apartheid. And but at that time, the businesses that did leave South Africa, they were just about 200, and they took 20 years to leave. They left during 20 years, and they left under a lot of pressure from the political pressure from different states. There is the assessment that the geopolitical uncertainty is now a vital component of corporate decision making. In the last 4 years, we have been witnessing completely unexpected global events. You do recall that in 2020, we have COVID. In 2021, the Americans left Afghanistan, and for some people, they started living in February, and for some people, they think that this was one of the green lights for the Russian president to invade Ukraine in 2022. 1 year after. And in 2023, we had the unexpected Hamas attack against Israel. We are in a period where we are at crossroads and where it is difficult to see how the evolution is shaping up. But apart from political institutes, faculties, state organizations, in the last 15, 20 years, there has been the founding of several institutions, several companies that deal and assess geopolitical risks. I would like just to mention, in bypassing the largest ones, I mean, BlackRock Investment Institute, Ernst Young Global Geostrategic Business Group, Standard & Poor Global Market Intelligence. So the interest on geopolitics has been growing from the business side. Just to finish my intervention, I was just my introduction, I would like to just to give an example to you, and it is what Ernst Young projects for 2024. What are for them? What they think it's going to be the most important events during this year. So they take four items. First one is de-risking global supply chains. Second one is regulating artificial intelligence. The third one is oceans take geostrategic prominence. And the last one is elections everywhere, all at once. So the de-risking the global supply chains, you do know about the COVID shock, the need for industrial policies that were talked about and trying to develop here in Europe and in the US when they realized that we didn't have the means to make the most basic medicines. And of course, de-risking has to do also with this difficult dialogue with China. And someone wrote that the problem with China, with de-risking with China, is like operating on two twin brothers, because the Western economy is so, in a sense, so integrated and so dependent of China and vice versa. So regulating, i.e., you know what it's all about. The oceans. The problem is that 90% of world trade is shipped via maritime routes. And what is happening now, what we have been witnessing, is attacks against ships. And you know about the Houthis, Yemen, and ships that are trying to go to the Suez Canal. On the other hand, the importance of the ocean is also stressed by the fact that there is the knowledge that deep sea mining is something that is going to come, and that deep sea mining is forecast to account for at least 1/3 of the supply of critical minerals which are necessary for the energy transition. Elections everywhere all at once. It's elections that are going to take place this year in countries that account to about 54% of the world population and near 60% of the world GDP. More recently, Jan Bremer, I don't know if you heard of him, but he wrote that probably the US presidential elections could be the main potentially disruptive event in 2024. And he did recall that Biden and Trump have completely distinct approaches regarding trade, agreements, tariffs, and foreign relations. I will now give the floor to Professor Chedomir Nestorovic. Please, Professor.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador, and thank you for the Diplomatic Institute to inviting me here. It is my pleasure to be in the beautiful city of Lisbon. It is my first time coming to Portugal, so I enjoyed this time very much here. I'm very happy to be with you and to talk about this issue. As it has been indicated, it is not a usual thing to teach geopolitics in a business school. Because when you are making a curriculum in a business school, you are talking about marketing, you are talking about human resources, about strategy, about supply chain, about finance, about all the other topics, but not this one. It is because businesses, they usually don't want to talk about politics. They don't want to talk about foreign politics. Why so? It is because they believe that there is a gentleman's agreement between the state and business. They are saying the state is taking care of the public interest and the corporations are taking care of the private interest. But this practically disappeared in the last 30 years when we have the emergence of the corporate social responsibility. So the corporate social responsibility means that companies are not here only to make money. They are not here only to make profits and distribute the dividends to the shareholders. But corporations have a much higher aim. So this is why in all companies you have the proliferation of missions and the guidelines of the companies. So now we have companies with a mission. According to Friedman and the other economists before, he used to say that the corporate social responsibility of the company is to make profits and nothing else. It's up to the state to decide about everything else. But now the situation is completely different. Today, not only corporations, but students, employees, they also believe that the role of the corporation is not anymore only to manufacture something or to provide something and make money. This time is over. So all my students, they're very much interested in ethics. They're very much interested in what is their contribution to the society, rather than only to talk about the profitability and efficiency of something that they use. So that's the time now that we can talk about corporate geopolitics on a serious matter and not as we used to talk about this in the past. So in order to start this discussion, I was listening to Ambassador's approach and I will pick up on two things. He was talking about the situation that we have in Ukraine, and you are absolutely right. There are many companies pulling out of Ukraine. However, many of them are also staying there. And they are staying there because you absolutely mentioned this fact, they are not forced to leave. So it means it's up to them to make a choice. So if it is up to them to make a choice, is it a political choice or is it an economic choice that they are doing? Of course, for some of them, they must leave because they are under sanctions. So they have identified the products, they have identified the companies, they have identified the individuals, so they have to leave. But the other companies are not forced to leave. And if they decided to leave, maybe there is also a political choice that they are doing so. So this is one thing that we have to mention. And the second one, you were talking about the geopolitical risk. Absolutely right. From the corporate point of view, when they talk about geopolitics, they think about risk. If it is a risk, they want to be protected against this risk. So for them, being a geopolitical risk or economic risk, or let's say ecological risk, is the same thing. There is a risk and they want to be protected against that. So this is why we have insurance companies. And these insurance companies are protecting you against all kinds of risk. It can be a revolution, it can be a war, it can be undeclared war or declared war. whatever you want, but they want to be protected against this. So just one slide concerning the risk. Here you have a certain number of institutions which are dealing with this. The first thing is the think tanks. The think tanks, this is their role, to look at the risk. And they are giving also advice, not only to states, but also to companies about the level of risk when you are going there. I listed here 3 of them, coming from 3 different places. The Council on Foreign Relations is coming from New York. You have the International Crisis Group, which is coming from Brussels, or you can have the Institute for Economics and Peace coming from Sydney. All of them, they are dealing about the risk. And they have their own maps of the world by indicating this is a risky country. From the corporate point of view, they are saying if it is risky, it means I have to pay more for insurance. And if I am sending people there, I have to pay them more also in order to cover the risk that they are taking by going there. After that, we also have some other institutions. He quoted some of them, Standard and Poor's. He quoted also, for instance, Moody's, or we can quote Fitch. There's 3 credit insurance companies are giving ratings to states and giving ratings to corporations. So what does it mean? It means that if you have a bad rating in this, you have to pay more if you are borrowing money from institutions or borrowing money from the private sector. And these 3 companies are private companies. They are not state companies. So it means that private companies are rating states. That's quite unusual because we believe that states are sovereign countries, that they're completely independent one from the other. But in fact, the credit rating insurance companies are rating them. And after that, we have credit insurance companies. So these companies are giving you the insurance. So it can be, for instance, Allianz from Germany, it can be Coface from France. They're giving you insurance, you have to pay for that. Finally, we have the sovereign funds and investment funds. The ambassador mentioned BlackRock as a private investment fund, but the sovereign funds are also part of the game too. So we'll finish concerning the geopolitical risk by indicating that we can have 2 approaches for that. The first one is coming from the military and politics. This is how they say this is a risky country, not a risky country, and so on. But we can also have business talking about that. In the first case, for instance, there is one person who is very tech savvy and going on TV quite often. His name is William Burns, and he is the chief of the CIA. And very often he is giving his assessment about what are the most important risks today. So obviously he's talking about Russia and Ukraine. He will talk about Hamas and Israel and some other places. So this is his job. He's the chief of the CIA and he is concerned with security. But business is different. And the ambassador has given a list of something which is coming from Ernst & Young, E&Y. And this list is very similar to the list which is given by the geopolitical dashboard of BlackRock, because the geopolitical dashboard of BlackRock is updated after every 2 to 3 months, and they're also giving the list of the different risks that we have there. And on top of this risk, it is not Ukraine, it is not Israel, it is the cybersecurity, which is happening to be on the top of the risk. And in the top 5, you also have the ecological risk, which is present there. So to finish with this small part concerning the geopolitical risk, it is to indicate that when we talk about geopolitics, it is not only the domain of the state. Of course, the state is the most important one, but we have many non-state actors. And among the non-state actors, probably the most important ones are the corporations. So far, there was a division of labor, public-private interest, but today, in 2024, it is extremely difficult to make a distinction about what is public, what is private, when we are talking about the strengthening of links between the corporations and the state. I will continue on maybe two more points and I will stop there. As you know, when professors start to talk, they never stop. So we have to we have to be cautious about this. So what is the point concerning the book that I have written? It is that we are talking about the main theories of geopolitics. So on the left side, you have the approaches, and on the right side, you have the different branches of geopolitics. So among the different branches of geopolitics, you will have the classical geopolitics first, which is the most important one. The critical geopolitics is a new kid in town. They came there, let's say, 40 years ago. You also have feminist geopolitics, which is an offset of the critical geopolitics. And the latest one is the business geopolitics. So I will mention them by looking at what is common between them. What is common between all the different definitions of geopolitics is that they're dealing with the state, with power, and space. Space used to be geography before. This is where geopolitics come from. But today, with space and with virtual space, we cannot use geography alone. So this is why maybe it is better to use the term space rather than to use the term geography. But the other two are still there. So we have state on one side and we have the power on the other side. So when we compare them, this is the, let's say, synthetic approach, how we can compare them. The classical geopolitics used to be the most important one. What does it say? The classical geopolitics is putting the state in the center. The state is sovereign, the corporation is not sovereign. So the state disposes of sovereign powers, especially the coercive sovereign powers in terms of police and army, and on the other side, the possibility to issue currency. This is something that we don't have concerning corporations. But on the other side, everything is based on reality, on facts, on nature, and on science. This is classical geopolitics. And we are looking at power, which is hard power and soft power. And we want to quantify this. So, in a nutshell, this is classical geopolitics. It was the only one which used to exist for millennia until the 1990s of the last century. In the 1990s, we have for the first time something called critical geopolitics. It is coming from critical theory. And critical theory has more to do with philosophy and sociology rather than with politics or with economy. So this is why there is a huge battle between authors who are in classical geopolitics and authors who are in critical geopolitics. So what is the main point that we have there? For critical geopolitics, power is not material. It is not military. It is not money. For them, power comes from knowledge. So the question is to know who creates knowledge and what is the purpose of creating a specific knowledge. And what is coming after the knowledge is the discourse or the narrative. And in the case of Ukraine and Russia, or in the case of Hamas and Israel, there is also a battle of narratives. It is also a battle of the storytelling that we have there. Today, I'm coming from Singapore. Singapore, in geography, it is south. But from the economic point of view, it is part of the global north. It is not part of the global south. But we are surrounded by the global south. And the global south is having a very interesting attitude concerning the storytelling and the narrative, which is coming from this side or on the other side of the conflict. So this is part of the critical geopolitics. They are saying the narrative, which is coming from a specific part of knowledge, can be as important as money on one side or military on the other side. The third one is probably the most intriguing one, which is the feminist geopolitics. And it is something that is not very well represented in a certain number of papers, but it is getting more and more traction. So in 2 words, what is feminist geopolitics? Obviously, we are putting the emphasis on gender and the representation of women in all stratas of power. Would it be in the economy, or would it be in the state, in the corporation, in academia, whatever the place it is? I'm always referring to the main book, which is relating to feminist geopolitics, which is coming from an author called Cynthia Enloe. And in her book, she is always asking, where are the women? When you have a G7 meeting, when you have a G20 meeting, when you have other meeting, where are the women there? So this is her leitmotif. She is always asking this question in order to be sure that everybody understands that it is of utmost importance. And the second point that we have for feminist geopolitics is that it is putting very much emphasis on individuals. For them, the geopolitical space is the individual, and the individual is sovereign. So we have to see the sovereignty of the state and the sovereignty of the individual. So they are using a very famous catchphrase, which is my body, my choice, for instance. So my body, my choice is indicating where is the sovereignty, and sometimes it is clashing with the sovereignty of the state in order to know who is the most important one. So it can be on the individual basis or on the international basis. For instance, migrants. When we have migrants coming to one country, and when they have zero documents because they have lost the documents or because they have burned the documents, do they have rights? Are the rights attached to the nationality, or are the rights attached to the individual? These are the questions from feminist geopolitics. So usually when we talk about feminist geopolitics, the misrepresentation is that we are only talking about gender. This is not the case. Of course, gender is very important, but individual sovereignty is also very important. These are the three branches that we have about geopolitics, and I will start in 2 minutes by indicating why is business geopolitics very important today. Because in business geopolitics, the state can be the corporation. We used to have this in the past. In the 17th century, from the 17th century to the 19th century, the biggest corporation ruled the states. So it was the time of the Dutch East India Company. It was the time of the British East India Company when they ruled the states. They were the states. They were printing money, they had the army, they had everything. So at that time, the corporations were the states. We don't have this today, or maybe we have. When we have the tech companies which are ruling new domains, or when we have private armies, so we have to reconsider this. In terms of private money, we can have private cryptocurrency, which is not issued by the state. So we have also this remembrance of these old times during the High Renaissance period. This is one thing. And the second thing is that in some countries, the states are asking private corporations to give them advice on foreign relations. This is totally new. We didn't have this before. And you have mentioned a certain number of companies. I will mention 2 of them. The first one is Lazare Frères, which is a bank. And the second one is Goldman Sachs, which is also a bank. They recently opened geopolitical advisory. They didn't have this before. But if they are opening geopolitical advisory, it means that they believe that the states will go to them for foreign policy or for geopolitical advisory rather than to go to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. That's strange, because we have people who are in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, who have been working there for decades, who have all the experience, and suddenly you have someone telling you, you are not relevant anymore. I will ask advice coming from private consultancy. This is strange. And we used to have this in France, for instance, when President Macron, he did for his reform on pensions, he didn't ask the Ministry of Labor in order to help him. He asked BlackRock in order to help him. So this is how BlackRock has become very famous in France as a some sort of a monster for the people who were protesting, because he absolutely disregarded all the people who were in the Ministry of Labor, who had decades of experience in the field and going for this. I don't say that all countries will do this, but some of them will do this. So it means that we live in a world where geopolitics is not only in the state. It is not only in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. It is not only in the Ministry of Defense, where usually we used to have people who were discussing about that. Now private corporations are coming on board, maybe not because they wanted to do it, but maybe because there is a demand coming from the state in order to do so. So this is why this kind of topic, which is corporate geopolitics, is quite interesting today, because there is a demand for this kind of thing coming up. So I will stop here, and after that, maybe during questions and answers, we will try to answer to some questions. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to
Maybe
switch.
place. Please come here.
Probably. We don't take risks.
No.
O que aconteceu? E agora? Agora já basta. Ah, é? Mas é que foi. Não, mas o pequeno computador foi aqui mesmo. Já está. Não, já está.
Okay. Let me begin by thanking the Diplomatic Institute in the persons of the Ambassador Freitas Ferraz and Dr. Joana Gaspar for inviting me to deliver this talk. A special greeting to Ambassador Mario Miranda Duarte, Portugal's ambassador to Singapore, whom, as far as I know,
Yes,
is the first mentor of this initiative. Allow me also to greet Professor Sedomir Nestorovic, whom I have the privilege of sharing this conversation. And of course, many thanks to all participants for coming and honor me for coming this afternoon. In particular, special word to my students here. Well, my approach is an eclectic approach, and my theoretical field is coming from chaos and complexity theories. So I believe in non-linearity, I believe in complexity, and I believe also there are not only state players on geopolitics, there are also non-state geopolitical actors, including companies and corporations. But we need to make a difference between real private companies and corporations and those who are tools of governments and regimes for geopolitical purposes. This is very important. And I will mention corporations as players, real corporations, and in the whole or global space. And my talk will be divided in three parts and also three arguments. These corporations can't ignore geopolitics anymore. Geopolitics matters. Geopolitics should be part of the decision-making process and strategic planning of companies, of course. And the last point, and main argument, geopolitical corporate responsibility can drive change because they are actors and support international rules-based order under stress. Systemic changes and transitions in global geopolitics are taking place in at least 6 areas simultaneously that coexist, intersect, and influence each other. And even without knowing the outcome of many issues and questions, all indicators point to a profound transformation in the behavior and interactions of players in all regions and the world space. a transformation that seems to be accelerating in a very complex and volatile way. Take, for example, the decline in the economic wave of the advanced economies and the rise of the developing economies, using IMF data and the criteria of share of world's share on GDP based on purchase power parity. At the same time, another significant change is the shift in the centrality of the world economy from the North Atlantic to the Atlantic Pacific region. We need to sum the share of the whole Europe, including Russia, and the whole Americas, to have almost the same share of the Asia Pacific. And of course, China is the main responsible for these shifts in favor of developing economies and the Asia Pacific region. No doubt, China is the main beneficiary and winner of hyper-globalization, assuming a central position in the world economy and trade. Furthermore, on the basics of its economic rise, China has emerged as a new superpower, giving the world's power structure an increasingly bipolar configuration, and in parallel, a growing rivalry with the other superpower, apparently in decline, the former hegemonic US. And they are competing for friends. And the world economy and the world order is kind of having a split into competing blocks. But the bipolar China-US rivalry runs parallel to a certain type of multipolarity. World geopolitics has become a multiverse of a more complicated mix of alliances and rivalries, with overlapping bilateral, regional, and other types of institutions and groupings. We live in a world of tremendous economic connection, but geopolitical fragmentation. The Russian invasion of Ukraine and the new conflict in the Middle East have further heightened geopolitical tensions. And multinationals are at the eye of this storm. They disproportionately provide economic connections across the world, and thus are disproportionately influenced by global fragmentation and the uncertainty that produces. Multinational corporations are responsible for 32% of global value-added flows and 64% of exports. When it comes to knowledge-intensive goods, such as electronics or pharmaceuticals, that number rises to 82%. Geopolitical alignment doesn't necessarily dictate business relationships. There are many countries that have strong trading relationships with China, but strong security and geopolitical ties with the US and the West. However, geopolitical competition and alignments are increasingly driving a fundamental risk for companies. Until a few years ago, governments' geopolitics were generally not a problem for multinational corporations. But companies now have to be very careful not to run into problems if they operate in a country that decides to retaliate against their home states, or if their own government imposes sanctions and restrictive measures targeting rival countries. This month, the day before the second anniversary of Russian invasion of Ukraine, for the first time in the 13th package of sanctions, the European Council targeting one company from India and another company from China. Global developments in recent years have highlighted interdependencies among geopolitical rivals, leading to a rise in neo-statism, increasing intervention in supply chains, and the focus on economic self-sufficiency. According to Global Trade Alert, the number of trade intervention has increased by nearly 180% in the past 5 years, with almost 4 times more harmful interventions than liberalizing ones. Economic security policies are motivated by 3 goals: reducing reliance on geopolitical competitors, promoting domestic industry competitiveness, and supporting domestic socio-political stability. And the more a sector is viewed as strategic by the government, the more economic security policies will impact that sector and its supply chains. Companies are responding to the increasing risk by friendshoring, a process of redirecting parts of their manufacturing, supply chains, and sales to friendlier countries. However, this is no longer enough. Take, for example, the geopolitical competitions involving commodities, the oceans, and the climate crisis. The first and likely most visible area of commodity competition is for the critical minerals that power EV batteries and the energy transition more broadly. China, which built its industry during a period of low geopolitical tensions, will retain its strategic position as the world's largest refiner of critical minerals in the near to medium term. And the US and the EU will seek supply arrangements with countries around the world, including through the Minerals Security Partnership and Lobito Corridor. A report by Standard & Poor's shows a 35% increase in mining exploration spending in the period 2018-2022, particularly by developed countries. And the US Geological Survey estimates the global production of rare earths has increased 131% in the 5 years to 2022. The US depends on China in 8%. The European Union depends on 98% of rare earths coming from China. Agricultural commodities is another area of competition as food instability and insecurity remains a top concern. Climate change will continue to affect crop yields and food production, while the war in Ukraine will continue to limit the global supply of grains, particularly given Russia's reluctance to re-engage in the Black Sea Grain Initiative. Water is another area of commodity competition, and that could escalate tensions. The number of countries with extreme water stress has risen from 17 in 2019 to 25 in 2023, according to the World Resources Institute. Domestically, policymakers will begin to prioritize adjusting how water resources are allocated across sectors and jurisdictions. And only 24 out of 153 countries with transboundary waters have comprehensive cooperation agreements, according to UN Water. About half of the world's population lives within 150 kilometers of the sea. At least 95% of global data flows through undersea cables, and 1/3 of energy production is offshore. Geopolitical competition over control of and access to the world's oceans is intensifying, with implications for supply chains, data flows, food supplies, and energy security. The risk of geopolitical disruption to ocean-based transportation will grow, according to a recent assessment of the world's 11 busiest maritime choke points. Ongoing military action in the Black Sea and increased naval and air operations in and around the South China Sea, and the possibility of more significant naval clashes in the Persian Gulf and the Red Sea have already raised maritime insurance rates and have the potential to disrupt critical international shipping lanes. Concern is also growing about the vulnerability of underwater communications infrastructure. Telegeography estimates there are about 550 active and planned submarine cables globally, and they could increasingly be at risk of geopolitically motivated cyber or physical attacks. The energy transition is accelerating interest in seabed mining of critical minerals. The US Geological Survey estimates that deep sea mining could account for 35 to 45% of critical mineral suppliers by 2065. But with 64% of the ocean floor located beyond national jurisdictions, geopolitical competition to secure access to these resources will, of course, grow. The Arctic Ocean is an arena in which all of these trends converge as warming climate expands access to the area. Geopolitical tensions will continue to extend into the Arctic in particular between Russia and the other 7 members of the Arctic Council, which, by the way, are now all NATO allies. Since the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change in 1992, climate policy has focused on mitigation, that is, reducing greenhouse gas emissions to halt climate change. In the past 32 years, the climate has already changed. Even as policymakers strive to mitigate climate change through emissions reductions, the urgency of adapting to the risks of climate change will come into sharper focus. On the other hand, climate-induced migration will also receive more attention. In fact, in recent years, more people have been displaced by natural disasters than by violent conflicts. More cross-border climate-induced migration, or climate refugees, is also likely from regions at high risk to destinations in Europe and North America. Ongoing political sensitivities around immigration in these countries could heighten societal tensions and political populism, extremism, and polarization. Geopolitics generates powerful influences on all forms of activity. In today's connected world, its impact on business cannot be underestimated. In sum, geopolitics matters for corporations and companies, as geopolitical events and dynamics shape the rules, risks, and opportunities for business. The Coda's warning of the impacts of geopolitics is deafening, including the World Economic Forum's 2023 Risks Report, places geopolitical risks within its top 10 list of both short 2 years and medium-term 10-year global concern. Remarkably, geopolitics has figured little in business decision-making. There are several explanations for this, one being the mindset of executives. Most CEOs came of age during a period of globalization when free markets and trade were assumed to be net goods. Most boards and decision-making structures are made up of managers, economists, and engineers with no training in geopolitics. But the ground has shifted and leaders need to update their assumptions. And that appears to be changing, however. Multinational corporations are becoming more aware of the impact of geopolitics on their business. According to the latest Oxford Analytics survey and report produced for the global insurance company WTW, businesses name geopolitical tensions as the biggest threat to the global economy now. At the same time, companies are more concerned than ever about gray zone aggression directly from states or supported by states in their geopolitical games. On the other hand, in addition to establishing or expanding their desks or departments to assess geopolitical risk, corporations are hiring experts in international relations, geopolitics, and intelligence. A few months ago, the Financial Times has reported on the rush to hire scholars and former diplomats, senior servants, and politicians to advise executives. Eventually, geopolitics must become integrated into business decision-making and a routine part of strategic planning. Thus, as expertise, companies not only must develop a geopolitical understanding internally, but they also need it on their boards. Understanding the complex interactions between geopolitics and business is essential for companies seeking to prosper in the ever-changing landscape. By seeking the guidance of expert consultants, companies can navigate these challenges and position themselves for success in the global market. On the other hand, the once unbridgeable space between business and politics has vanished. Corporations have to assume that business and international politics and security are interlinked. The emergence of corporate activism is a further development on issues of economic inequality, racial injustice, and gender equality, as well as the climate crisis. There is a new expectation of business action in the geopolitical realm. The former CEO of French energy conglomerate Total Energies, Christophe de Margerie, was dismissive when asked to respond to Russia's 2014 annexation of Crimea. And I quote, we are involved in business. We are not involved in politics, he said. That lofty perspective has crumbled. Business executives have been forced to choose sides after Russia's 2022 invasion of Ukraine. Just like the ambassador mentioned, the exit of 1,000 companies from the Russian market in the first 3 months after invasion is evidence of something new. This historic, massive, speedy, and voluntary business retreat from Russia is unmatched in scale and impact. It is 5 times the size of the previously unprecedented 200 company withdrawal from South Africa over apartheid that took 20 years, protracted, grudging, and under pressure. That company exits extend beyond those industries targeted for sanctions to include hundreds in consumer products. Reputational and operational factors are driving the huge exodus. Reputational as companies have chosen to disassociate themselves from Putin's regime, and operational transportation routes and supply chains have been interrupted. Russia's long invasion of Ukraine is testing the commitment of business, but this could see the emergence of a new pillar of support for the rules-based international order. The new declaration from the Business for Ukraine Coalition, an international civil society initiative of organizations and companies, encourages companies to reinforce responsible exit from Russia, to block access to the economic and financial resources enabling Russian aggression. When considering what broader purpose should drive this corporate geopolitical engagement, this Business for Ukraine declaration offers an answer, calling Russia's aggression an attack on the rules-based international order, which must be protected to safeguard the international community and the global economy. This points to broader interests and values at stake in the Russian war on Ukraine, because supporting the rules-based international order can become the basis of a new geopolitical corporate responsibility. Business has a fundamental stake in the international order as the framework for stability, prosperity, open societies, and markets. Economic development needs a stable rules-based international order. A new geopolitical corporate responsibility does not need to become a doctrine, but can instead be an agenda to support the international rules-based order under stress. The elements of this agenda for business are not entirely new, having emerged within the last 2 decades. But none are implemented with the priority and urgency necessary to address the global problems and opportunities that underlie them. Moving this agenda forward could be transformational, both for business and the international community. The war in Ukraine may be a catalyst or even a turning point for the emergence of a new geopolitical corporate responsibility. As multinationals face inescapable and irreversible pressures to address geopolitical challenges, this agenda can inform their commitments and actions to help uphold the international rules-based order on which, after all, they depend. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor. I would like to open for questions, but before that, I just draw the conclusion that the labor market is demanding more and more young people with degrees in international relations, and that reality is bound to expand in the future. And I'm drawing that conclusion from what I heard from both professors. So, I'm asking for questions, please. There you will. Yes.
Good afternoon to you all. Firstly, I would like to extend my sincere appreciation to the organizers of this conference, specifically the Strategic Studies and Analysis Center from the Diplomatic Institute. To both speakers and the coordinator, I would like to thank you for this opportunity and for exchanging your thoughts on geopolitics in the business branch. With that said, I would like to pose two questions. I believe both of the speakers and the coordinator are able to respond. One of the arguments that was put forward today, from my understanding, is that albeit corporations are non-state actors, they are ever-growing geopolitical actor. Considering that argument, how do you believe governments should partner with corporations in order to advance national interests? And my second question is, notwithstanding the importance of geopolitical risks, what other products, let's call it that, of geopolitics should be included in strategic planning process and decision making of corporations? And most importantly, how should that happen? Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Thank you very much for the question. The first one is $1 million question. Because we have to see how can we work together. On one side, we have the state. On the other side, we have corporations. As we know, in the past, we used to have cases when the corporations were more important than the states, and it was rightfully called corporatocracy. So corporatocracy means that the state is ruled by business. So we used to have this in Latin America, for instance, in Brazil, for some time, when the corporations were so important that in fact the presidents did not matter very much. Everything was done by the corporations. Today, if we are going to the City of London is 1 square mile that we have in London, but it is called City of London Corporation. So it means that when you elect people in the City of London, the inhabitants, they have one voice, but the corporations, they have even more voice. So the corporations rule the City of London. That is 1 square kilometer that we have there. So the time of corporatocracy is over. So we have to see how in good intelligence we can work together. And the point is that the states are asking very much from corporations. They are asking them to solve all the problems that we have in the society. Would it be discriminations? Would it be employment? Would it be knowledge creation? Would it be education? Would it be health management? Everything. They ask companies to solve everything. So now the question is, if you ask corporations to solve everything, will you give them power in order to do so? You cannot only ask them to participate without giving something in exchange. So that's the problem that we have here. Can the state give something to corporations in exchange of their participation for the public sphere? So for the moment, we don't have answer to this, but probably in the future, we will have more and more discussions about that.
Thank you.
Professor?
Oh, thank you. Thank you for the questions. I just like to add that each part should do its own part, both governments and the companies. The states and the governments cannot ask everything for the companies, or of course, give everything for the companies. But the states and the governments need to understand there are something that the companies should and can do, and the companies are well aware or should be that there are something they could do also. That's why I was mentioning on the contribution for the international rules-based order. The other part is that business and companies are not doing things to attract expertise in such a hurry as they should do. I give you an example that we are talking about. We have, since 2015, a PhD on international relations, geopolitics, and geoeconomics. We have some individuals, but not companies funding research, funding PhDs, giving scholarships. We have a lot of companies giving scholarships and funds for business MBAs. But why not in the field of geopolitics and
They are
international
distractions.
relations? They are absolutely distracted. And if at least they look at the newspapers and the online websites, they at least copy and follow the model of bigger enterprises and groups, having intelligence, having expertise, paying very well for consultants. But maybe this is a problem mainly in Portugal. The question is, our PhD needs the only of its kind in Europe. And as far as I know, most companies in Europe are not hiring, at least in a high level or in high numbers, experts on geopolitics. Unfortunately, for the experts, of course, but also for the companies and the states and in Europe as a whole.
So, please, you raised your hand. Yeah, please. Do you want to answer to ask a question? No, I thought that someone else also raised this arm, but it's not. It was a false alarm. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. My question relates to this concept of economic security that's been rising over the past few months. Reindustrialization, subsidies, the return of protectionism. Is the international economic order shifting back to a sort of mercantilist policy orientation? And my second question is about how states should organize themselves for this. I'm reminded that Japan, for example, has created their own economic security ministry. How should states react to what's going on right now? Thank you.
Good, very good question. And it was also following the COVID, because during the COVID we are always looking at this economic security for the mass, for the vaccines, for the everything that we needed. So, in order to answer this question from the business perspective, from the capitalist point of view, and especially from the globalization point of view, there is no, let's say, national economic security, because all the borders are supposed to be open. There are no limit concerning exchanges. So in that case, it was useless to talk about national economic security because of the openness of all the borders. And we were living in the so-called happy globalization. Today, this happy globalization is dead. So now we have to reconsider everything that we forgot during all the years of globalization. So now we are back on the national security, on the national economic approaches that we didn't used to have in the past. So the problem is that it is difficult for the states to tell companies, you should do this or you should do that, because they're private corporations. We live in capitalism. We don't live in a Soviet economy. So since we live in capitalism, we cannot force the companies. If you force the companies to do something, the company will close the company. And what you will do in that case? You cannot force them to do anything. So the problem is to have this good intelligence between the state on one side and the corporations on the other side. And we have seen this during all these farmers' manifestations in the different parts of Europe. It's always the same thing. The state cannot force, especially big companies, buying milk or buying cereals from the farmers. So there must be a good intelligence between them. Otherwise, there is no national security. So it will be, or the other option is the nationalization or mercantilism, as we have mentioned before. But I think that option has been put aside. However, maybe some political parties still think in these terms, in mercantilism, that could come back, that could resolve all the problems. But for the time being, it is impossible. However, the corporations, they are also engaged in the corporate responsibility. So they know what is their responsibility towards the customers, towards the employees, towards all the stakeholders that exist in the country. So they will probably take this into account. And we also have to give them credit in order to think about that. So for me, the good intelligence between them would be the best way.
Thank you.
Okay.
Professor Luis Tomé.
Just adding also something on this very interesting question. First is, what are we thinking about when we use the term of economic security? Because there are different senses. So of course, from a state national security point of view is one thing. From a corporate point of view is a totally different thing. But the question is, today, there is urgent, it is crucial for a corporation also understands the perspective of national security. For instance, how can a corporation saying there are no borders, we are not dealing with national security, and open the door for rivals enter in the cyber domains and data. So a lot of globalized companies are now locate their structures because they are afraid of open the door, and they know that not only their own states but other states and rivals are looking and open to find a way to go in. On the other hand, for instance, you mentioned Japan. Of course, Japan is one of the countries that first since the 70s have a broad concept of security. Usually, traditionally, at that time, security, both national and international security, was related with territorial integrity, protecting against aggression coming from another state by military means. Japan, during the Cold War, explored another concept of security. So we can and we will promote national security through economic means. So they create and enlarge the concept of security to use the economic tools to promote cooperation and to their own foreign policy. Of course, today, all countries and the conceptions of security relates, of course, with this. So Japan is not strange that having such a very strong economic security feeling. Of course, Japanese state, the Japan state is one thing, and Japanese companies is a different thing. But the idea of a broader sense of security is there. It is where it was created.
Thank you. More questions, please? Here.
Hello, good evening. Thank you for your availability for the insightful presentation. I'd like to highlight two topics from the presentation. The first one, the board has mentioned that in the past, global corporate companies did exist, such as the East India Trading Company. Now, it is known that in the present, this still does happen in one way or another, as there are corporate giants that currently have more GDP than some countries, such as Amazon, of course, or Microsoft, or even Apple. The second topic I'd like to highlight is the board mentioned that there has been an increase for the demand in geopolitics expertise coming from private corporations. Now, leading to my question, I would like to highlight that there have been companies that have been known to support public armed forces. I'm of course making reference to the support from the Israeli McDonald's, who supported the IDF recently. So my question is the following. While the mercenary work is still deemed illegal, private military companies are not. As such, could we see a rise in the future for a demand in the participation of corporate action in global conflicts, and could corporations see this as an opportunity to garnish power in the international politics? Thank you.
Good. Thank you for the question. So concerning the first one, concerning the power of one corporation, of course, we can look at the metrics, and the revenues is one of the metrics. So in that sense, Walmart is the biggest corporation because they have revenues for more than $550 billion. So it is much more than the GDPs of many countries. However, this is revenues. It is not the profit. But when we compare to the GDP of the country, it is not the money that the country has. It is the sum of the activities that we have. The sum that the money that the government has is the budget. That's a completely different thing, and it is much smaller than the GDP. So we have plenty of metrics in order to analyze this, and I agree with you. There are some companies which are extremely big. So one of them, for instance, is Samsung in Korea, because it represents more than 23% of total GDP in the country. So, and Samsung is still a family affair. So the heir of Samsung believed that he was more important than the state, and he ended in prison. So we have this relationship between corporations on one side and the state on the other side. It happened with the example of Jack Ma, with the example of Prince Al-Walid bin Talal in Saudi Arabia, or some others who also ended in prison. But for Prince Al-Walid, it was a good prison. It was the Ritz-Carlton in Riyadh. It's not the same thing. But it means that we can have very big corporations on one side. We can have states on the other side. We have many metrics in order to compare them. Today, you are right to mention the tech companies. Why the tech companies? Because they are ahead of the state, because they are creating new relationships, and the state is lagging behind. So, for instance, they're inventing new thing in cyber. They're inventing new thing in, for instance, space management or the space control that the state don't know what it is. If they are investing in quantum technology, if they're investing in biotechnologies, the state doesn't know what it is. They cannot regulate this. So they will regulate at only ex post. They will regulate only with certain late approach there. So in that sense, the corporations are ahead of the others. So in that case, we cannot compare them. We have this and that. Second point is the involvement in wars. And you have mentioned the case of McDonald's, the fact that they were giving food to the IDF. It is not the first time, because before the war, they used to give discounts for the IDF members before. But there was also a backlash in Kuwait, in Oman, and in some other places when they started to collect money for the Palestinians. Same McDonald's, but McDonald's is a franchise operator. So as a franchise operator, the different operators, they are free to choose whatever they want. But in Russia, it was not a franchise operator, because McDonald's holds more than 85% of all restaurants in Russia. So here, it is the decision by McDonald's. It is not the decision by the franchises. And we have more and more demand. Why so? For the corporations, because they are visible. Sometimes we don't see what is happening, but everybody knows about Apple, everybody knows about McDonald's, everybody knows about Coca-Cola. So if these companies are involved, everybody is looking at them. And we had the example, I'm coming from Singapore, we have Malaysia there. So in Malaysia, you also have the franchise of McDonald's. And the people started to boycott McDonald's in Malaysia. And the Malaysian franchisor had to put on the door, please, we are Malaysian. We employ Malaysian people. We are buying Malaysian produce that you are buying there. They have to inform them about that. So it means that even if the corporations don't want to be involved, they will be involved in this, because the public, the employees, the customers, the public opinion, everybody will ask them questions about this.
Yes.
Yeah, I will mention only the second question on military private companies and mercenaries. The question is, there are situations where it is difficult to make a distinction between mercenaries and mercenary companies and real private military companies. However, as all other sectors, some challenging situations are also opportunities for business for some of these kind of companies. Conflicts and wars, for instance, geopolitical tensions. But we need also to be very careful to understand that who makes the rules are the states, including the big companies. There is no single state, there is not a state that recognizes as legal mercenaries companies. It is illegal by international law. It is illegal by all national laws. However, we are well aware that there are real mercenary companies. And of course, in most cases, these kind of corporations are operating in parallel, hand by hand, with the governments and regimes. Of course, real private companies in the West, mainly, they are offering other kind of services, not only in time of war kind of operations. They are providing security, for instance, for embassies or diplomatic representations, security for companies, infrastructures, including some humanitarian aid and so on. But in certain situations of conflict, they are useful for the states, even for democratic states, because regular armed forces need to follow more restricted rules. If, for instance, as happened in Afghanistan or Iraq, the US wants to follow someone and put wanted, and I pay you X. There are certain things that regular armed forces or the intelligence services cannot do. But of course, if they don't know what they're doing, they just pay for the information and pay for the individual in the card. So this is something that some companies are doing. A different thing is when a company is doing foreign policy and national security hand by hand with the state, just like, Wagner Group, but is having so much power that it represents a risk for the government. And it is a power game. In this situation, one of the parts will win and the other will lose. And we all saw what happened in Russia.
So I want to thank both professors. I want to thank you for coming here, and the session is over. Thank you so much.